having a second session. Hello, this is Rob Hirschfeld. I'm one of the co-chairs of the DefCore committee. Egla, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, this is Agla Sigler and I'll be helping out Rob. Thank you for joining us.
And somebody's having audio trouble. I'm assuming since we've been talking to people that they can hear. Egla joined me at the beginning of the year for this execution phase for DefCore. And so I'm going to lead the presentation, then we'll both take questions towards the end. I have, I think, 20 slides, so forgive me for moving quickly. I'm going to assume that you haven't heard anything about what DefCore is, and we'll address those questions. But there's a very clear call to action for us in this. And once again, we'll record this. You can review it. There's a lot of material available about DefCore. And then, of course, we're having a session in 12 hours for the other side of the world for people in different time zones. Oops. So DefCore is an OpenStack board subcommittee, and our charter is to answer what is OpenStack. And we'll talk about why and what we're doing about that. There's a very specific call to action here. And so let me give you a little background. In Vancouver, so in about a month, we're going to be approving the official DefCore process. That process has been under discussion and review for actually over 18 months. In the last 18 months, we spent a lot of time doing principles and guidelines and sort of figuring out why we were doing this and what was important. The process that we're asking people to review now is about how we do it. It's very nuts and bolts. These people do this at this time. In order for you to review that and give us input about it, you need to understand what our objectives are with DefCore. So we're going to spend some time giving you background about what DefCore is, what core is, why we're doing it, how it actually has a real material impact in the OpenStack community. And when we ask for comments, it's not just, I don't like things. Obviously, part of our community needs to be able to affirm that this is the right thing. So we're asking for feedback to improve, but also feedback to endorse. And then at the end of this presentation, hopefully you'll have enough to be an informed reader of that what we call the 2015A process. So starting really simple, DefCore. And we chose the name DefCore intentionally because it's something that is Googleable. Unless you're into very loud music, it's the only other reference for DefCore, D-E-A-F core. And it's important to understand that when we talk about core in this case, there's 3 places where we have OpenStack as a community has used core. We're really only covering one of them. So people talk about community and around the OpenStack, they talk about OpenStack and they create OpenStack meetups and things like that. That's perfectly fine. That's a use of the OpenStack mark. They talk about code. So the OpenStack code is in itself, there's a much broader body of code in OpenStack and projects in OpenStack and activity in OpenStack than DefCore will cover. It's really focused on the commercial use of the brand. So very specifically, when somebody says they have an OpenStack product, DefCore is the way the foundation measures and governs that use of the mark. And it's very important for OpenStack to control its mark because we don't want OpenStack to be diluted as a brand. It needs to mean something specific in order for it to have value for the community and also for it to have value for the vendors and the foundation itself. So that's sort of our job is to define what using OpenStack means. And in that regard, the number one thing that the board has decided we want that to mean, and this is broadly our board responding to the community, is that it should mean something. It has some meaningful use when somebody says they're an OpenStack product. And the goal has been for quite a while interoperability, so that if you have 2 OpenStack clouds from 2 different vendors or 2 OpenStack public clouds, that they should have a high degree of interoperability. And OpenStack should be reliable. It should be tested. It should have a common implementation. And then, very importantly, we don't want to impede growth and innovation. So we have a balance between stability, which allows people to have interoperability and common platform and growth, but yet innovation and new ideas and new capabilities. We worked out this very short 30-word definition for DefCore. I'm going to read it because we spent a lot of time on it. It's a process that sets requirements for all OpenStack products by defining must-pass tests of capabilities and designated sections of code. We'll describe both of those things. And the definitions use community resources and involvement to drive interoperability by creating minimum standards for products labeled OpenStack. So we're going to dive into basically decompose all those things. There's a lot of presentations that have covered this slide and a lot of the other material leading up to it. This was the starting point of the DefCore process, where we sort of defined the principles by which we were going to make these decisions. Things like there was going to be a common definition of OpenStack, that we would allow people to substitute parts of the code but require other parts of the code, and then that we would use tests to validate what OpenStack was, to the point where we would say there were some tests that you must pass to be an OpenStack cloud, and that vendors could test it by themselves. So all these sort of base principles were outlined in Hong Kong at the Hong Kong Summit, or approved at the Hong Kong Summit, and then we've been marching towards defining a process that embodies these principles. And what that ends up looking like is something we built sort of out of these 9 points. I did a blog post with a lot more detail about this. But it was very important throughout that we would have an open and transparent process, both in designing the process and then in executing the process, that balanced community, vendors, and board interaction. So the community part of this looks like tests, right? Tests are truth. It's very important to us, but not only Tempest tests. It's important that they're OpenStack tests, but we're working to expand what the scope of that means. That's one of our active discussions for our next review cycle. But we're talking about building an interop map. So we want to find which capabilities are important to the community and widely used. Those are the ones that should become core. We expect the community to be the one writing tests. So we're placing a high premium on people who contribute tests and making the tests valuable. And then we also wanted to create capabilities out of the test. So it's not just a single item test, but something that people can understand at a higher level. So capabilities have been very important based on groupings of tests, so testable capabilities. The vendors, in this case, have responsibilities also. They actually run the tests. We are not a police state. We're not trying to create a certification agency. So we expect the vendors to be self-policing. And because we're using community resources, users can validate the vendor's test. Clear pass-fail results, transparent reporting, and we do have a way that the vendors can say, wait a second, this test doesn't work outside, in the real world. And so we have appeals processes. And it's important to understand that the process we're adopting requires vendors to pass tests to use the brand. And that's actually been in the foundation governance from the very beginning when it came to brand compatibility. If you're a vendor, it's always been expected that vendors would pass tests to use the mark. We're finally getting to the point where we have a way to vet what those tests are and then have people work through those tests. The board's responsibility here is to actually define core. And that's a big job in the sense that we want to do it in a fair and transparent way. So we have a lot of mechanisms that allow us to gauge those and get those through the process. And the DefCore committee is the conduit for that. And we'll talk about how we communicate. A lot of what today's meeting is actually talking about the communication path. But really, fundamentally, the board's job is to pick the required tests. The foundation, and it's not everybody distinguishes the foundation from the board. The foundation is actually the staff, the executive director, the paid staff, that oversees the project and protects the brand. The board is really the governance body. And the foundation's role is actually to manage the vendors and enforce the brand use. So if you use OpenStack incorrectly, you'll get letters from the foundation. So, very quick dive into what is DefCore, how does it work? DefCore's primary deliverable is a guideline. We've been avoiding the word spec, but a lot of people find that the word spec is sort of comparable for this. It's an OpenStack specification of what's in or what's out. And it looks sort of like what I've put on screen here. There's a dated version, so 2015-03 was our first approved spec. And then every time the board acts, we'll add a date, a new spec. We talk about which releases are covered in that guideline. We talk about what platform components are in or out, what capabilities are in or out, and then which sections are in or out. And we have a common lexicon of required, advisory, deprecated, and removed. So the goal here is that nothing should catch people by surprise. So when things come into the guidelines, they go through advisory before becoming required. And as they go out, they go to deprecated before they're removed. Pretty straightforward. Our goal is really not to surprise anybody. It should be a very readable document. The more interesting thing will be when we get into what are capabilities and components. It's important to understand that the guideline is actually a JSON document with quite a bit of detail about which tests are in and which tests are flagged. That's not quite easy for people to parse, so there's a restructured text version. It's much easier to read that sort of gives you the highlights. The JSON is the official approved version. And so this is how it looks when you look at the guidelines. It's important to understand, and this, if you've been tracking DefCore, this was a change in the last cycle. DefCore is not about releases. We used to talk about Havana DefCore and Kilo DefCore and Juno DefCore. What we've really done in changing to guidelines is we've switched to dates. And that was really important in our process because DefCore is not really about the release. People would ask, oh, is this feature going to be in DefCore or not? And DefCore is not really about tracking the latest features. As a matter of fact, it's about lagging features. So if you look at this graphic we've tried to capture, the DefCore guidelines capture a subset of capabilities within the overall OpenStack integrated release. So we pick things out, and then they lag after the feature. So it's pretty common for us to have somebody say, oh, is this new feature from Kilo when's it going to make it into DefCore? Well, it's really a question of how we score that feature and that capability and how it rolls in. So, this graphic is meant to show DefCore is really a subset of the broader project, and then is going to take, things are going to take time to roll into DefCore. Once they're in DefCore, it take a long time to get them out if we choose to get them out. So we're very cautious. Another way to look at this, and I've mentioned these things, but hopefully visualizing them in different ways will help people sort of get a handle on it. The guidelines cover releases. So we will say this release or that release is actually covered by DefCore, so we don't expect people to apply DefCore to Epic per se. Platform components, I'll talk about that. Capabilities, which are really APIs. So the black marks at the edge of the circle sort of reflect the idea that we have capabilities that are really API tests, not inside, and they're tested. And then designated sections, which is code. So one of the things that's been very important in the OpenStack community, although contentious, not everybody agrees with this point of view, it's been a consensus view to say that OpenStack must have certain code to be considered an OpenStack product, and there's some code that you can replace. So designated sections embodies this concept that if you are an OpenStack cloud, you are running OpenStack code and passing the required, implementing the required APIs to pass the test. So it's, DefCore has both components. And then I call it, again, advisory required deprecated. So there's a flow as things change where you can look at the guidelines and say, all right, this is what's coming in. Often that's the place where things are most interesting. So what are platforms and components? So this is a change from the cycle before last. If you've been tracking DefCore, we introduced the concept of OpenStack platform and components. So the idea here is that of the capabilities, so capabilities are groups of tests, The capabilities roll into a component. So, for example, object storage or compute, potentially database as a service could be a component one day. Those components can be licensed as individual license things. So you could become an OpenStack-powered object storage product that is a license that the foundation can confer. That is a more restricted license than if you pass the test for all the capabilities that we cover, and that would enable you to become an OpenStack-powered platform. So the platform means that you've enabled all of the components that we've identified as being platform required. I see a question here. Keystone, when this graphic is actually from the previous cycle, so it was not in the capabilities at the time, and we're working to add it. It's actually not a requirement in the 2015-03. It's advisory in 2015-04, and it will be should be in the 2015-05 requirement. All right, and I see tests accumulating. I'm going to hold on tests for a moment, see if I can keep moving through, and I might answer a couple of them as I go. Which code is designated is also a topic from the previous cycle that we spent quite a bit of time on. There's some specific guidelines about what is designated or not. This graphic sort of helps people understand what the purpose is. The idea here is there is common code. It's a signal for what should be upstreamed and what shouldn't be. So, our expectation is that vendors will actively participate in the designated code. It's where the upstream, what must be upstream, not designated code. Some people have called plugins or modules where you can substitute. And we have guidelines to identify what should be designated or not. Very important to understand, we're not trying to take a micrometer and figure out which line of code is designated or not. Designated code is a general definition. It's meant to be a guideline, not a you must include this one line of code in this one module. That's not our intent. Our intent is to help people become and stay part of the community. And so this chart helps explain what those things are. Capabilities themselves are pretty straightforward in the fact that they're literally just groups of tests. So we spend a considerable amount of time, and there's a team of people who's doing excellent work, literally saying these tests are in, these tests represent this capability. Today they have been limited to Tempest, but in the future we expect them to not be limited to Tempest. And that's a little bit of a funny definition. People use the word Tempest to mean the gate tests. You could clearly run multiple tests under Tempest as a framework. The idea is that the tests will be in the community, and we're in the OpenStack community managed by OpenStack. We're not expecting tests to be third party. Somebody wrote some tests that they use on their internal OpenStack. The tests have to be community governed tests. But then those bubble into capabilities, and then we spent a significant amount of time a year ago defining capability groups. How do we score capabilities and principles by which capabilities are identified as core or not core? It is worth noting we don't pick individual tests. We don't score individual tests. We actually bubble them into groups, and then we score capabilities. So a lot of time in the DefCore process is spent saying, is this capability one that should be core or not core? And because that in itself can be a very controversial or contentious discussion, we have a 12-point score. You can go back to previous DefCore material. I've blogged quite a bit about this, where we actually identify is something a core capability or not. That in itself is an hour discussion. Good. Very quickly, so we'll have lots of times for questions. And I appreciate people queuing them up. We'll go back through and we'll take them out as we go. So the 2015 A is the name of the process document. There's a bit.ly link for it. That will take you to our GitHub. This is my Austin shirt, Austin conference shirt. 2015A. We spent a lot of time talking through this process, and what we found was it was easiest to understand if you started with a timeline. So we have a 6-month guidelines. Right now we're doing a guideline every month because we're trying to catch up. So May we plan to have a guideline. August we plan to have a guideline, and then from there they will start following this normal. The guidelines will follow the timeline. In this case, in between summits, DefCore will start the process of the preliminary draft using the current guideline, which we call like 2015.next. And at that's really the busy work time for the DefCore committee, where we're ideating new capabilities, we're scoring the capabilities, we're coming up with what we think is a solid draft of the next guideline. The goal is to have that presented at the summit for the board to review it, and then to allow the community at the summit to begin the engagement process of understanding what will be in DefCore. Remember, this isn't about the release at the summit or the release that's being finished. DefCore is really going to be lagging. So a lot of this process is focused on the previous release, not on the current release. By definition, anything new in the current release is not going to be core. It has to be. There's actually a scoring component that says it must be stable for multiple releases. After the summit, we move into a secondary phase where vendors can start looking at that list and seeing if things make sense. They can ask to have tests flagged if the test doesn't conform to implementations. And we can also start getting feedback about what things should be in or shouldn't be in. And we also move debating. Whoever joined, please mute. We've got an echo. Thank you. And then from there, we would be moving into review and cycle. And I'll talk about this on the next slide. So those 4 phases sort of break into these guidelines. And if you look at this draft document, which is what we're asking you to do as a result of coming to the meeting, in this draft document, you'll see there's the 4 phases translate into. Somebody else needs to mute, please. Thank you. So the 4 phases translate into, we gave them letters, and they have a significant amount of text detail inside of each letter with multiple points in it. And I would ask, when you read it, remember this is a how document, not a why document. So that we have tremendous amounts of why backing up the things that we're doing. I've been skating through it very quickly, and I'm sure we'll cover more in questions. But this is really about the nuts and bolts, and we don't want to be overly specific. We want to make sure there's room. Okay. Let me go backwards. So the 4 sections are generally this. I keep backing up. We have a guidelines review phase where we collect the data. At the summit, we actually start doing review. From that point forward, we will be using Garrett. So changes that we're tracking will go through a community review process. It's very important for us, since this is such a broadly impacted process where vendors, operators, users, and developers all have interests. We want to be able to use the community tools so that people can +1 or -1 changes into the system and have it be very transparent and blocked. So we want to make sure that there aren't anonymous changes, that there aren't backroom things, that we have a very visible and transparent process. Number 3 is very much about that. And then guideline approval is where the board meets to approve these guidelines and make it go. And if we need to accelerate or decelerate this guideline, we can definitely do that. We have been accelerating it. One thing I neglected to put in here is that the foundation licensing requires vendors to submit to one of the last 2 guidelines. And then their certification state is valid for a year. So we have 2 guidelines out right now, 2015-03, 2015-04. A vendor could pass either of those and then be able to use the trademark for a year before they have to recertify. When we introduce 2015-05, then 1503 will be deprecated and vendors would no longer be able to use that for certification. I should have put that in the slide. And so what are we asking? If you're a user, in addition to helping review the material, it's time to start asking your vendor, if they've passed the guidelines. If you're a vendor, it's time to start validating your product. If you are an operator who's just using OpenStack, we would love to have you participate and give feedback about which capabilities you think are important. Getting involved in defining capabilities is and also tests that help define capabilities is what are going to drive interoperability for OpenStack. We have the 2015.next guideline is in GitHub. We're constantly working to work with designated sections of code, running Tempest and uploading your results. We're still working on a project called RefStack. In the past, if you've gone to past DefCore meetings, you've heard me talk a lot about RefStack. And that project is still continuing. We've decoupled DefCore a little bit because we haven't reached a point yet where we can really publicly, hopefully RefStack will contradict this, but where you can run Tempest and then upload the results. That is a very strong goal, and it's part of the DefCore objective to collect meaningful data so that we can score capabilities using these are tests that are really passing, these are capabilities that are really present. And then we need people to say yes. A silent yes is not as helpful for us as we go through this process. We need both people giving us constructive feedback. If you don't like it, please tell us why. And if you do like it, a silent majority does not, we need an active majority. And then we have some references in the material. GitHub, we have the wiki. We've been moving a lot of that material into GitHub also. I've blogged about this extensively, so if you want history and materials, my blog has some of the most extensive archives about DefCore. Go. And that's the end of the presentation. I'm going to take a breath and use questions. Egla, do you have points or comments you want to make in summary?
Sorry, I was muted. No, I think it all sounded really good to me, but I have heard this a few times already. So we do have several questions in the chat, and I guess this format works really well, where if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll try to answer all of them if we haven't yet, or if Rob hasn't answered them yet. We do have a lot of background noise right now, so if you're not talking, if you could please mute, that would be very helpful.
Unfortunately, I can't see who's individual.
I think if this background noise continues, you'll have to go into presenter mode, I think.
Okay. The questions that I'm seeing, I'll review, and then if you have more, please ask. Keystone tests were under TBD because Keystone did not have explicit tests. And Chris Hogue from the Foundation, who's the DefCore secretary, has been working with the Tempest group and Keystone and Tempest groups to fill gaps and get some Tempest tests in. We have a very strict policy where capabilities require tests, and that's why it was TBD for.
Right. And Rob, this is Chris Hodge, and we now have tests in place for Tempest, and our hope is after the last capabilities meeting that we'll be able to have identity tests for the 2015-05 DefCore capabilities.
Keystone, obviously you can't run OpenStack without Keystone, and it is actively tested, but we couldn't call it out as a dedicated capability.
So is that we run services basically as identity service instead of saying component-based for the Keystone?
Could you run another identity service?
We do, yeah.
Sorry, was that your question?
That's right. Please go ahead.
So you can, so technically with 2015-03, you could, because it's not a required capability. In 2015-05, it will be a required capability with designated code. And so when we make it a component, then it will also be a. I'm not telling people to run alternate Keystone. The point that is important to make is that when we have required capabilities, then we also will have that those projects will have designated code. It is very much the intent of DefCore and the process that you run the designated OpenStack code.
Is that the Keystone has the authentication and the authorization, both the text to be taken care with the URL that's been provided? Is that because of that it has multifunctional role to play? Is that because of that, or is it something different that we have in identity and we just run the identity service?
So if I understand your question, let me rephrase. So you're asking why Keystone was if there was an intent on that?
Yeah, like basically we make use for authentication and authorization as well, and while we run it as an admin or any of the administrator rather than any of the tenants. So just wanted to understand, because it has any multiple roles to play, because of which Keystone we are not running, or is it because we are running only the identity service?
So Keystone's mission was entirely unintended in the fact that it just didn't have its own test suite. It didn't have dedicated tests. So this was not and is not intended to be a signal that Keystone is a replaceable component. One of the reasons why we presented it in the past with TBD is because we wanted to make sure people knew it would be included and become a required piece. And this is, it's worth noting, this is not, there's considerable people in the community who believe that DefCore should move to an API-only spec, and it's important for me to represent their viewpoint in presentations. And there are considerable people in the community who believe that OpenStack is code, and it's absolutely essential that OpenStack is always code. So we actually have some actually polarized perspective on how this should work. DefCore represents a compromised position by saying some of the code is required, some of it is substitutable. Keystone, just like anything else, the expectation is that you will use the designated Keystone code, and I believe we've already identified designated sections for Keystone, and those have been presented. So if you are interested, if you are a strong believer, and I know many people who are in the OpenStack should test the API and let the implementations float, that will be the subject of DefCore in the coming cycles. So after we've completed this work, we have promised people that we would actively discuss this topic. And so I'm being very explicit because I've made personal commitments to people that it would be a topic of discussion in future times. So people should be prepared for that. That'll be very exciting. Passionate. People are very passionate on both sides of this. Apart from Tempest, so using tests that are not in Tempest is something that we are actively taking up in the next cycle. John Dickerson in the Swift project has already submitted a patch that brings in a large suite of tests for Tempest. I'm excited to see that because I think that our goal is tests, not Tempest per se, and so the broader suite of tests that we can have, the better. we do need to make sure that vendors know how to run the tests, and we have mechanisms to accept that. So we are going to hold adding tests that aren't Tempest tests until after 2015-03. And my expectation would be that those tests, we're going to have tests besides Tempest coming in immediately after the 2015-03 spec is approved. And Chris is working on schema updates to accommodate that. So one of the things that will change after 2015-03 is that we will do pretty major revision of this JSON schema that we store all this information in to accommodate multiple test suites and better test identification. And there's a list actually that Chris has been putting together of objectives for the schema update. Chris, did you want to make a comment about that?
Just that the schema update is in progress. We are going to be, looking at, other sources of tests and finding a way to, to integrate those tests into the process. We want to make sure that we balance being able to use it though, and and so we want to make sure that the tests are not only there, but that they're configurable and usable by the end users. And I don't know, Rob, if I can mention something else too, but if anybody out there currently has a product in the OpenStack marketplace, if you actually run the DefCore test results and report those results back to the foundation, back to me in particular, we're going to be ramping up the efforts from the foundation to highlight vendors that pass the DefCore tests. And so if you get the results to me before the summit and before kind of our preparation plans go into there, you'll be highlighted in the initial marketing efforts surrounding the new DefCore standards that were recently approved. And so, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is probably the best address to send it to is interop@openstack.org.
So we're really excited. We're starting to see vendors coming through. I don't want to. I know I've heard that at least one vendor's made it. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder. So this is definitely something that vendors are actively picking up, and should be. I'm excited to see the response. We had a question I'd skipped about newsletters. So I would recommend the super user site and subscribing to content from the super user site. That is a significant source, and then Planet OpenStack has a significant collection of material that's refreshed every week, if not faster, for OpenStack material. And then, let's see, skipping back down, how do you test designated code? Designated code is a self-governing item. So our goal is not to create a police state. It actually says that in the designated code section. It's Apache 2 code, and so it's really an indication of what we expect vendors to do and how we want people to behave. And we spent a fair bit of time in the early days of designated code, so almost a year ago, discussing, if you wrote code for your product that didn't make it in but was upstreamed, is that okay? Yes. It's really, if you look at the designated code sections, you'll see they're very general. It's not a design to rat somebody out because they didn't include a module in part of the Swift pipeline. Although the Swift pipeline code modules are very clearly delineated in designated sections. It's really much more about the base statement. We expect OpenStack vendors to use the upstreamed OpenStack code in certain parts and be very specific about that. So it's really not, we're in no way trying to make the foundation into a validation and inspection body. That's been counter to our objectives all along. Oops. Trying to clear things off my screen, sorry. Other questions or comments?
Thank you, Rob, for doing this. I'm so excited to see that we have so many attendees and participants and great questions. We are very active on our mailing list, and we do have weekly meetings every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time, so you can join us there weekly. Please do.
All right. We'll end the session a little bit early. Everybody, thank you for joining.
Thank you, Rob. It was a very interesting session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.